Good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for being here. I really appreciate it. This is, of course, my first week as Prime Minister, but I've come here to Washington, 3,500 miles from home, for a very simple reason. Because every policy we have in pursuit of our missions, everything we're doing to improve people's lives, all that we hold dear, depends on our security. That is our first priority. It is always our first priority. I made that crystal clear to the British people in our campaign, and so I also came to this summit with a clear message, a message of enduring and unwavering commitment to the NATO alliance, to Ukraine, to the collective security of our country, our continent, and our allies around the world. I'm proud to represent a party that was instrumental in creating NATO 75 years ago. It was Labour Prime Minister Clement Attlee and a Labour Foreign Secretary, Ernie Bevin, who fought so hard to make this a reality. This is our history, and we're proud of it. And I am determined to take that pride forward into the future. So have no doubt we will match our words with action. We live in a new and dangerous era, one defined by volatility and insecurity. We face the generational threat of Russia, aided by the likes of North Korea and Iran, conflicts that rage across the Middle East and North Africa, the challenge of China, terrorism, and international institutions that should be at the heart of the response are being undermined. Our collective reaction to this moment will shape the world for decades to come. So we must stand up for our interests, but we must also stand up for our values, because it was that insight, that unity of interests and values, that guided Attlee and Truman in creating NATO 75 years ago. We must mobilise what Bevin called our collective moral and material force, because our values are not a point of weakness, as Putin may think. They are the source of our strength. NATO has become the most successful alliance in history, precisely because democracy, freedom and the rule of law were hardwired into the NATO Charter. And that is the legacy that we inherit today. An inheritance not just of an institution, but of a duty and of service. And it is our duty now to take these fundamental principles and adapt them to meet the test of our times. That starts in Ukraine. Together with our allies today, we have reaffirmed our unshakable support for Ukraine's ultimate victory, our determination to deliver justice for the awful crimes that Russia has committed. You will have seen the scenes this week in Kyiv, Russia using some of the deadliest weapons in its arsenal on innocent children, striking a hospital. When I went to Kyiv, I saw for myself the devastation and inhumanity of Russian aggression. I went to Bucha, just outside Kyiv, and spoke to some of the people there who described to me and pointed to me on the road where they had picked up the bodies of their friends, their family members who had been killed, many of them handcuffed, and had to transport them to find graves for them. Using shopping trolleys, they told me, was the only way they could move those bodies. And that had a profound impact on me as they dug those graves, mass graves, for the people who'd been shot and left in the road. The alternative to Ukraine's victory is unthinkable. Not only an affront to our values, a green light to aggressors everywhere. And the fate of Ukraine is a cause that unites Britain, And that is why we will deliver £3 billion worth of support to Ukraine each year for as long as it takes. We will speed up our delivery of military aid, and together with our NATO allies, we have pledged €40 billion of support to Ukraine every year. We've established a new body to coordinate that support, agreed to ramp up industrial production, and confirmed Ukraine's irreversible path to full NATO membership. As I told President Zelensky today, NATO will be stronger with Ukraine as a member. And because of the generational threat from Russia, that demands a generational response. So we will increase NATO's focus on future threats around the world, with Britain playing its full role. We will continue to put our armed forces at NATO's disposal, maintain our presence in Estonia and Poland, lead the land arm of the Allied Response Force this year, and maintain and modernise our nuclear deterrent. Today, this alliance is stronger than ever. 23 members are now spending 2% of their GDP on defence. But in light of the grave threats to our security, we must go further. So we will conduct a strategic defence review to strengthen our armed forces and protect our national security. And we will set out a clear path to spending 2.5% of our GDP on defence. And I say with candour to all our allies, we must understand that this is now essential. This is a defensive alliance. We do not seek conflict. But we know that the best way to avoid it is to prepare for it and to lead. Britain belongs on the world stage. So I am determined to reset our relationship with Europe, return to leadership on climate change, and engage more deeply with the global south. Because whether the challenges we face are military, or global challenges like climate change, cyber and energy security, we will meet them head on, stand shoulder to shoulder with our friends and allies, because history shows we are stronger when we do so. This morning I laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier at Arlington Cemetery. It was an incredibly moving moment, just being there and seeing the very, very many graves. And that wreath laying was to honour the sacrifice made by so many Americans, side by side with British troops, in defence of our freedom. It is a reminder of our unbreakable bond with the United States, a bond which I reaffirmed here with President Biden, and a reminder that we must honour the service and sacrifice of our veterans with the decisions that we take today. So we meet this moment with a new resolve, determined to renew Britain's place on the world stage, proud of what we have to offer, confident not just in the value of our strength, but in the strength of our values. Britain was at the heart of creating NATO 75 years ago, and our commitment remains unshakable, the foundation of our security and prosperity for many years to come. Thank you very much. I'll now take a number of questions. I'm going to start, Chris Mason, with you, BBC.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Chris Mason, BBC News. You told us earlier that President Biden had been on really good form when you were talking to him, and he was across all of the details. Tonight, he has confused President Zelensky with President Putin, of all people. He isn't really across the details, is it? Is he? Is it not reasonable that some might feel anxious, some might feel scared that the President of the United States could make a mistake like this?
Well, I would urge everyone to look at the substance of what's been achieved over these 2 days. We have a bigger NATO, more countries. We have a stronger NATO. We have a real sense of resolve, and the third of the sessions, the council sessions, was a session with President Zelensky there in relation to Ukraine. It was a session that he described as a success because of the package coming out of it. And President Biden led through all of that. That is an incredible achievement of this council, and when we think of the global threats, that is the best possible outcome we could have had today. And so I think he deserves credit for that, as does the team that have worked with him. We closed this council with a renewed confidence and resolve to meet the challenge of Russian aggression. That is the outcome that we all hoped we would get to, and President Biden led us through that. Thank you, Chris. I will go now to Anushka, please.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Anushka Sharma, ITV News. Prime Minister, the calls for President Biden not to run again are going to intensify tonight, and all of that is detracting from the very important challenges you just set out. Would you urge his critics to hold back? And just on a personal level, were you mortified?
Well, look, what I said to Chris stands. We came here for 2 days of the council to achieve a particular purpose, which was to celebrate 75 years of NATO, but recognise that looking backwards is all very well, but we've got to face the challenges of today, and it falls to us to do the hard yards, to identify those threats, in particular Russian aggression, but that wasn't the only threat that was identified and talked about, and to come away with, on Ukraine, President Zelensky calling it a success. And President Biden led through that, led into that in the preparation. And I do think he deserves credit for that, because in the end, that is the single most important thing coming out of this council. Thank you. I've got Beth. Sky.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister. Beth Rigby, Sky News. In the UK election, you didn't much like to remind voters that you were a leader and proponent of a second referendum. But here in NATO, is your Remainer status a benefit with fellow EU leaders who didn't much like Brexit? And if I may, when I asked you earlier if criticism of President Biden's cognitive ability was misjudged, you told me yes. Is that still the case? And if so, do you feel sympathetic towards him over this mortifying mistake he's just made? Thank you.
Beth, on the question of engaging, I mean, we've engaged with pretty well all the leaders that are here. That has been a huge benefit of being here within a week of forming a government. So we've had very productive meetings, very many bilaterals with leaders of the NATO countries, including European leaders. And yes, that is about a reset. It's about a reset of our relations, not actually about an institutional reset. It's not about going back into the EU, but it is certainly a reset, because I think for very many people there was a sense after Brexit that the UK had become too inward-looking, was not as interested as it once was in its place on the global stage, on the international stage, and I've wanted to reset, to change the posture, if you like, to say that the UK is confident, is back, and wants to make sure that we play our leading part in meeting the threats of the world faces, which are, I think, more intense now than they've been for many years, to increase our trade and investment across the world, to deal with climate change. And all of that is part of the reset. But it's a posture, if you like. It is. The UK is back. It's confident. We want to play our part on the world stage. I've always believed we've got a huge amount to offer on the world stage. And I think that that's been very well received by colleagues, both from Europe and elsewhere. And I'm pleased about that. Sort of part one, because next week we have the EPC, which we are hosting, of course. And so for our European partners, EU and non-EU, we get the opportunity to follow up on those discussions. But it has been important for us to deepen relations that we actually started in opposition, and make sure that we are that confident, outward-looking country that I know we're so good at. Thank you so much, Beth. Look, on President Biden, I can't really say more than I've said already. This was a successful council. He led it. He deserves credit for that. The outcome that matters is that Ukraine, they are, look at what happened in that hospital last week. They are facing Russian aggression in its physical sense every single day. They are dying every single day. Children are dying. And they need our support. It is not just support for Ukraine. It is also about our values. And it is about what we stand for. It's about what NATO values are. And we've had a successful outcome on that. And I think that is a good thing. I think people have worked really hard for that. That doesn't always happen at the end of councils like this, but we've reached a declaration which has been signed off. It is good, and now we follow through on it. And President Biden deserves credit for planning this, leading this, and getting us to that stage. Thank you. I've got Ryan from The Sun.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The UK is in the middle of a prisons crisis. There is currently a huge percentage of foreign offenders in our prisons, some 10,000 out of 85,000. Would you consider speeding up the process so overseas offenders are sent home quicker to free up space? And have you spoken to the Home Secretary or Justice Secretary about this?
Well, there will be a statement about it, Ryan, so I won't get ahead of it. But on your specific point, it is always the case that prosecutors can ask for a deportation order at the end of a prison sentence. And when I was Director of Public Prosecutions, I instructed my prosecutors to do that in very many cases, and therefore you'd serve your sentence. The judge would, at the sentencing stage, impose an order that meant at the end of the sentence you're then deported. And that's the right thing in those cases, and those deportations should go ahead. But the crux of the problem we face at the moment, and it is a terrible problem, is that we've got far too many prisoners for the prison places that we've got, or we soon will have. That is gross irresponsibility of the outgoing government. It is a basic function of government that you should have enough places for your prisoners that the judges are sending to prison. And for that to have failed, I think, tells you something material about the last government. Now, we have to pick this up and we have to fix it. I can't build a prison in the first 7 days of a Labour government. We will have to have a long-term answer to this. We'll put out a statement on this as soon as we can with all the details. But I hope you can sense from my voice just how frustrated I am to have discovered, not this, we knew there was going to be a problem, but the scale of the problem is worse than we thought, and the nature of the problem is pretty unforgivable in my book, having worked in criminal justice. To have allowed your criminal justice system to get to a state where you simply haven't got the prison places for prisoners, this is a predictable problem, is shocking. And I think that when further details are released of this, you'll have plenty of extra questions for those that came before us. Thank you very much, Ryan. I think we go to Hugo now.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Hugo Jai from the iPaper. One of the talking points of all international gatherings these days is the opportunity and threat of AI. Can you tell us if you plan to maintain or to change the approach taken by the last British government? And briefly, if I may, the great English cricketer James Anderson is in the middle of his last game. Will you be sad to see him go?
Oh, on the second part, absolutely. I mean, what a legend. Even now, a brilliant sportsman as he plays out those last few, or the last game. I don't think there's going to be any dissenting voices in saying what an incredible player, what an incredible sportsman he was. In relation to AI, look, firstly, it's come up quite a lot in the bilaterals we've had here in this council in relation to the discussions we've had with other leaders of NATO countries, because it is obviously important. I think the posture or basic approach here matters, because AI is a great opportunity and, of course, carries some risk and threat with it. And the first question is, which of those do you sort of lean towards? I lean towards the opportunity. I think this could be a real game changer, particularly when it comes to healthcare. But it needs to be within a regulated framework. I actually thought, to be fair, that Rishi Sunak, I think it was last autumn, when he was convening a conference on this to talk about a framework, was in the right space. Certainly didn't criticise him. I thought we could have gone a bit quicker on that, shown a bit more leadership, but I want to build on that, and I wouldn't at this stage simply say he was fundamentally wrong. I think the basic posture is one of opportunity. but with a framework to recognise the risks. And that is the sort of discussions that we've had during the course of the last 2 days with other leaders. Sam from the Daily Express. Sam.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We've heard a lot over your first week about your desire to deepen and close relations with the EU, but we've heard nothing about any plans to take advantage of Britain's status outside the EU. What do you say to those who fear this is the start of the betrayal of Brexit? And also, just a quick one, you put trust, restoring trust in politics at the heart of your election campaign. You made it very clear that was very important to you. So can you just level with us here and now about, do you truly believe that President Biden is capable of serving 4 years in office?
Well, on the first question, it won't come as a surprise to know that in the bilaterals we've had here, we've pursued the question of free trade agreements. Some of those are rollover agreements that we did have with the EU, some of them not, and so that has come up repeatedly in bilaterals because we've said our number one mission is growing the economy. In order to grow the economy, we need to increase trade and investment, and where we can get deals to help that, then we want those deals. We can do it outside of deals as well, but a lot of my bilaterals have been about the global threats, about Ukraine, about Russia, of course, but there's been an element that's been about the economy, because having made growing the economy my central mission, I'm very interested in the discussions that we've been able to have with allies about how we can deepen our relationships in terms of economy, trade, investment, and defence and security as well, not just in the traditional sense, but this discussion about industrial strategy sitting behind defence and security, because there's a lot of backfill that's needed now because of the provision of capability to Ukraine. So that's been a central part. Yes, I want to reset the relationship with Europe, but that doesn't mean going back into the EU. It means developing our posture, our status, the way that we operate on the world stage in the way that I described to Beth. And on the, sorry? Well, look, I was with him last night. We spent best part of an hour together, covering a lot of ground. We've been through 2 days of this council and come to a very good outcome. He's led through all of that, spoken in every session, pulled people together, and we got a good outcome, and I think he should be given credit for that. Thank you, Sam. Lucy, of the FT, Lucy Fisher, sorry.
Thank you, Prime Minister. On the way out to the summit, you talked about trying to use this as an opportunity to hold talks with your European counterparts, specifically on closer UK-EU relations on security. Could you give us a bit of an update on how those talks on that subject have gone and what you're hoping to achieve on this next week at the EPC, specifically on a new UK-EU formal pact on security? Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for raising that. We have discussed that here. I do think that we can do more work with our EU partners when it comes to security. I think that's good for us and good for them. And at the moment, there is no formal way of doing that. That doesn't mean there's no cooperation. Of course it doesn't, but there's no formal mechanism. So that's been discussed in our bilaterals. It was actually included in my remarks in one of the council sessions here. The second session was one in which we had EU representatives there as well as representatives of some of the other countries around the world. And so I raised it specifically, this question of no formal arrangement. And I think that is good for the UK. Yeah, we've got a lot to offer when it comes to security in relation to the way that we work with the EU and others across the world, but in an increasingly threatened environment, which it is, the more we can do on security, the better for the protection of everybody in our country. Thank you very much. And Pippa from The Guardian.
Thank you, Prime Minister. At the election, a host of your ministers just clung on to their seats after challenges from pro-Palestine independents. Thangam Debonair, who lost hers, says it was in part because of Labour's position on the Gaza conflict. How do you convince those people, many of whom might otherwise support you, that you're not just another politician who talks about recognising the Palestinian state and never does so? And would you ever consider moving on recognition without America or Israel? Because if you don't, there's a possibility that it might never happen.
Well, firstly, I really do want to pay tribute to Thangam Debonair, who did a fantastic job in the shadow cabinet and was a incredible politician, absolutely dedicated to her brief in relation to creatives, a distinguished cello player herself. So pay tribute to her. She's got a lot to offer, and she will offer a lot more. And I recognise that in a number of seats, the margins were reduced in her case for a variety of reasons, to be fair, in terms of the particular challenge that she was facing. But look, this council has been an opportunity for us to discuss it came up again in the council, but came up in bilaterals, what our position is in relation to the Middle East, because now we are in office, it is our solemn duty to play our full part in resolving the conflict, which has to end. There must be a ceasefire. That has to allow the hostages to be released. And I do shudder to think what state they're going to be in. It desperately is needed for humanitarian aid to get in. There's a catastrophic situation on the ground, and with that aid is needed. But it needs to be a foot in the door for a political process towards a two-state solution, a viable Palestinian state alongside a safe and secure Israel. We don't have either of those at the moment. That is the process that we all should work on. We've been discussing it with colleagues here in bilaterals and recognising Palestine as part of that process. And part of that process is important rather than at the end of the process, because this is not a process. This is a right that the Palestinian people have. It's not in the gift of anyone. And so far as our policy is concerned, I'll determine our policy, not following anyone else. Thank you. Thank you all very much indeed. And thank you for being here so late after a long couple of days. Safe journey home for those of you that are going home. Thank you.